That's better. Okay, welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 329th meeting since we started in February of 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require our speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give an hour to make a presentation. If anybody interrupts the speaker during their presentation, we remind the interrupter we listen only one fool at a time. That's one of our rules. Then we have question and answers, not speeches from the audience of the speaker. And then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at this podium to respond to what the speaker had to say for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. So, but before we introduce our speaker, are there any announcements? Now's the time for announcements. If anybody has an announcement they want to make. You have an announcement? Come on up here.
Scooter and Cookie need a home. Scooter is a Chihuahua, and Cookie is his daughter, actually. She's a mix, a Chihuahua Schnauzer mix, I think. Their owner, the last living owner, I just was helping get set up in a nursing home. And it's really sad. The two little dogs, I mean, you know, we don't have compassion for them. But anyway, you can contact me. And how old are they? I would say they're at least 5 years old, both of them. And
the father's got to be older than the child.
that is actually a biological fact of nature. The father must be older than the child. So, but anyway, they're looking for a home. The shelters only keep them for so long, and then they get euthanized. So, yeah, it's they're set for execution here if we can't find them a home, folks. So, thank you.
You're in the right state.
Yeah, Ed Stone is a regular college member here. He had an accident. Susan could tell you better the accident. Anyway, he's in the hospital. Ed Stone, you know, Rosalinda Stone's ex-husband. Anyway, he fell on his face, messed it all up, and his neck is out of it's broken, or he's paralyzed. He's in the hospital. Which hospital is he in, Susan? Susan, which hospital is that in? Presby. All right, he's in Presby Hospital, and that was my announcement. But anyway, if you know Ed Stone, you should know that he's in Presby Hospital. He's not doing very good, so you may want to see him. Come on up here, Jack.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jack Blackshear, and I'm the Democratic nominee for the House District 112. Look on your voter's card and see if you see the 112 on there, and if you do, November the 8th, or if you go to early voting at the 24th, look down the ballot, and if you see my name, I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Well, next week, Jim Love is our speaker. He's going to talk about the sleeping giant. It's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. September 3rd, Labor Day, past, present, and future. Gene Lance will be the speaker. We got a whole lineup here. September 16th, September 10th, what should have happened if the official story of 9/11 is true? That's Pat O'Connell should be the speaker. September 17th, on a green revolution. The time is now. Gary Stroud, he's he's running for Congress in the District 32 against Pete Sessions. He's a Green Party candidate. He wants to have a voice here. We let anybody speak, you know how that is. So anyway, he'll be here. And September 24th, on Changing Yourself Before You Try to Change the World, John Edmondson, educator, clinical communicator for a nonprofit. He's going to be here. He'll be our speaker. Anyway, that's all I have for announcements. Our speaker tonight is Catherine Sabers McGovern. She's going to talk about on reinstating the fairness and equal time doctrines. She's a retired assistant United States attorney, Dallas, 2010-12 Democratic nominee to U.S. Congress, District 32, with current practice in McGovern Law Office since April 2011, and a very recent delegate to the 2016 Democratic National Convention. She's going to show that given Citizens United's impact on campaign financing has been surpassed by the absence of the Federal Communications Commission's Fairness Doctrines and Equal Time Doctrine in political contests in 2016, as demonstrated by Trump's receipt of more than $2 billion in unpaid for media coverage in the primaries alone. She's going to argue that it is not the amount of money donated to politics which imperils American democracy, but the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine and the Equal Time Doctrine by the Federal Communications Commission. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Catherine McGovern.
Now, some people say I don't speak that loudly, so if anyone in the back doesn't hear me, you can just move up forward. I'm so pleased that in spite of Tom's good judgment, he's invited me back. And you all are really and truly one of the best groups to come and speak with, because you always listen, which is awfully nice. But you also have good questions, and then you challenge me further by rebutting something I've said. So for me, it's lots of fun, and I'm glad to be back. Now, on your tables, just in case you didn't have a chance to read up on what the equal time provision, or the equal time doctrine as it's called, or the fairness doctrine, I just printed it off WikiLeaks. You can Google it, and there's a lot of information about both doctrines. I need to correct something that I had included in the statement, that is the repeal of the equal time doctrine. It's really not been repealed. It is a federal statute. It's 47 U.S.C. 315 of the Communications Act. But the interpretations that have been made with respect to the Equal Time Act effectively makes it almost impossible to enforce if the FCC were so inclined. Now, just to give you a quick definition in case you hadn't, the Equal Time Doctrine is federal law, has been on the books since approximately 1947, and before it was preceded by the Radio Time Act provisions. So this is something that's been on our federal code for many, many years. The concept is this: the airwaves on which broadcasting is done, as well as the cable transmissions, is a limited amount of available space. And so the idea when the equal time doctrine was passed was to try to be sure that the owners of licenses for broadcasting couldn't just make it a monopoly to have only one view. Clearly, Fox News didn't hear that rule, but it's as the definition is, the equal time, or more accurately, the equal opportunity provisions of Section 315 require that radio and television stations and cable systems which originate their own programming must treat legally qualified political candidates equally when it comes to selling or giving away airtime. But then in 1960, they passed an amendment which gave 4 exemptions, and this has caused what we have seen, particularly in the 2016 election. You don't have to give equal time to candidates on regularly scheduled newscasts. You don't have to give equal time on news interview shows. You don't have to give equal time with respect to documentaries that is assuming that the candidate isn't the primary focus. And you don't have to give equal time on the spot news events. And the idea is that those are news, they're not just aimed at the one candidate or giving one candidate's views. Again, we have seen how that's worked this year, because Trump, who is real, you have to give him credit for being masterful at creating non-news and making it something that's reported. So whether you go and cover the fact that he says audacious things like we're going to build a wall along the Mexican-American border and make Mexico pay for it, or whether we're going to gather up all the Muslims and make them prove they're really Americans. Those of us who are a bit senior in years can think back to the McCarthy time when teachers were being gathered up to promise or prove that they were really loyal and not communist. And then you had the movie people in the industry who were gathered up as potential communists. Or we can go back to the Second World War when, after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese were gathered up and interned. So this is historically something that has happened in the past, and we would hope that we would be smart enough not to buy into that sort of thing. But in the context of what I am talking about, on the equal time doctrine, is it really news for a candidate to say that one of his proposals is to build a wall between Mexico and the United States? Is that really a news or event, or is it simply a candidate's platform? Is a platform news? And if a platform is news for one candidate, then it should be news for another, so the equal time requirement should operate. If you have a candidate like Trump did during the primaries, who calls in to talk TV or radio shows and ask questions or express his views, is that really news? Is that what was intended when the equal time doctrine was passed? Or is that simply a station allowing a preferred candidate to speak? We had 18 Republicans who were in the primary, and how many of them were given even a percentage of the same time to call into a news station, talk show, or whatever? As to documentaries, I don't recall seeing very many documentaries of the candidates, so maybe that's an exemption that will develop and we'll see more of in the coming general election. But these on-the-spot news events, again, you can look at what Trump would do. He would have a candidate event at some school, and he would have all the press would show up in case he said something, so that he was getting a lot of free exposure. But what was he saying that was actually news as compared to a political promise, political statement? I submit nothing, because a campaign is a campaign, a platform is a platform. But is it news? Isn't the news simply that he is running, not that he is arguing one position versus another? if the candidate is arguing one position, then why wouldn't the opposing candidates be given equal time to state what their positions are? We saw in the, certainly in the Republican primary, that wasn't happening, and because so much of the news was focused on the Republican primary, the two candidates, the main candidates in the Democratic primary also, were put into a position that they had to say something outrageous in order to get any kind of comments, or they had to have themselves in a spot where they were being asked to prove a negative, which all of you know from your logic, you can't prove a negative by asking, someone saying, well, did you enjoy your lunch after you beat your children? That's a double negative. That's a negative, because if you answer one part, that is the lunch, are you accepting in fact that you had beaten your children before you had lunch? If you had not beaten your children and you say, but I didn't beat my children, then that raises the issue of, have you ever beaten your children? And what if somebody saw you, and what is beating your children? Anyway, you can see what I'm talking about. So, with respect to the equal time doctrine, the FCC is in a situation where, because of the deregulation that occurred after President Reagan became president, there was so much pushback that the FCC essentially stopped doing anything which enforced in an intelligent way the whole basis for the equal time doctrine. If that is supposed to be with candidates who are legally qualified to be candidates, to be given equal time if they are allowed free time, then to say this isn't free time because it's one of the exemptions and it's really a news event requires the FCC to go back and discuss what is a legitimate news event. And is the fact that a candidate is having this event or fundraiser out in Tallahassee by itself a news event? So that is the conundrum that I think that we face. It's not that other people cannot buy the kind of free time and attention that Donald Trump got because of the failure of the FCC to interpret these exemptions as they were intended, I believe, based upon what what they call the legislative reference research was at the time that it was passed. But consider now that everyone who is coming forward can do or could try to do the same thing. And what are we getting in terms of the electoral process? We are not getting a proper discussion of what are the serious issues that are facing the person who is asking for our vote to elect them. What we are doing is we are getting something that is sideshow entertainment, but is not news if you consider that this is a serious election, and the news is necessarily related to what is this person going to do if he or she is elected. So we have at least two parts of the exemptions to the equal time doctrine that need to be either eliminated, or there need to be better definitions for what the press can do. The fact that it improves the news stations' ratings and they make more money is not satisfactory, since the stations are supposed to have these broadcast licenses in the public interest. That is a provision of why they are able to get licenses. So my challenge on the equal time doctrine is that the failure of the FCC to enforce its exemptions or fail to do away with them, but to enforce them as they were intended has created a disservice to the electoral process, which means that they are not being operated in the public interest. Thank you, ma'am. Now let's talk, and we know that from the $2 billion that Trump has gotten just during the primaries in unpaid exposure. Now, how does the fairness doctrine differ from the equal time doctrine? First of all, it is not a law. It was a policy of the Federal Communications Commission, which was based on and somewhat parallel to the thinking that follows the equal time doctrine. The fairness doctrine deals with issues and advocacy so that you don't have an opportunity for a broadcast station is not free to broadcast do controversial coverage of controversial issues without providing a balanced presentation of the other side. One of the early cases back in the 70s, 1969, 1970, is a case that was called Red Line Broadcasting. In that case, the station, which happened to be a Christian station, had attacked a pastor at at a church whose views they didn't agree with. So the gentleman asked for equal time under the fairness doctrine to respond because it was a personal attack. That was one of the areas that allowed for equal opportunity. That went all the way to the Supreme Court, and ultimately the Supreme Court agreed with the FCC had the authority to pass or enforce the fairness doctrine because of the fact that the airwaves belong to the public, and the use of the airwaves by broadcast entities is based upon the public interest. It's not in the public interest for a radio station or a TV station or a cable channel to be able to personally attack an individual without giving them the opportunity to respond. So that's how that's supposed to be. But once again, there were a couple of things that were happening from the time it was passed to when it was basically dissolved. It started in 1949, so it wasn't like something that just appeared. It, like the equal time doctrine, was intended to recognize that, if you can broadcast or televise on the airwaves, you have great power to create positive or negative views concerning individuals or issues. So that's how that kind of grew along. But come the election of President Reagan, some of you may remember that he really thought there were too many regulations. Everything should be deregulated that could be deregulated, and among the things that should be deregulated was the fairness doctrine and the other rules concerning that the FCC passed in compliance with the Communications Act. So on the basic premise that the airways belong to the public and they are to be used in the public interest. But what President Reagan and people that he appointed felt or believed is that we have so much media now. We have, you know, the broadcast that comes in over the airwaves. We have the cable channels. And of course, at that time, we didn't have the internet. But, you know, as it's grown, it's still the same idea that we have so many sources of media that you don't have to have a regulation that requires equal opportunity by each of the stations or cable channels when you are covering an issue or when you are attacking an individual. So slowly but surely, the FCC has chipped away at that, and finally in 1985, you had so much concern in Congress that Congress in 1985 passed a bill which went to President Reagan. The bill would have put the Fairness Doctrine back into the federal code so that it would have the impact of law. It was passed by both houses of Congress, which, you know, in this day and age we know is somewhat unusual, but it happened, bipartisan support for it. President Reagan vetoed it. So then later on, after President Reagan left the White House, George W. Bush was elected president. And so Congress again passed on a bipartisan basis legislation which would give the Fairness Doctrine the impact of federal law because it would be part of the Communications Act. George W. Bush also vetoed it. Now, you can appreciate that both President Reagan and President George Bush were people who ran on the idea that deregulation, less regulation was good for business and good for America and so forth. That was their political view. But it also enhanced the opportunities for those who were supporting their political agendas and their political candidates to have greater use of the airwaves. There was a case out of, I'm going to say Minnesota, but it could have been Wisconsin, and I can't remember right now, but the point was that both the broadcast stations were giving free time to the Republican candidate. So when the Democratic candidate said, I should be getting time, both in terms of Fairness Doctrine and in terms of the Equal Time Doctrine, they were turned down because the Republican was the incumbent. And they were saying, well, this was really covering him and his governmental affairs. You can appreciate that sometimes that's the case, but not always, and not when you are, within 60, 90 days of an election. If what you were doing is covering primarily the incumbent and giving that a positive spin, and you are not giving the challengers any access that's free, then you are tilting the use of the airwaves to continue the incumbent's ability to be reelected. That's not a small thing for our electoral process. It creates something very similar to the gerrymandering that we see in the way that Texas has its various districts drawn up. So I would say this, that if you don't have if a broadcast station or TV station or cable station doesn't have the obligation to provide fair access to the opposing side or to candidates who are expressing views that they don't agree with, then or they're not obligated to air stories about issues. Or take Flint, Michigan. I mean, how long did it take for that story to actually break? It was when Rachel Maddow got onto that and started raising questions on her newscast. It wasn't because it was in Michigan's news that came up. And so you say, well, is this another example of why an issue that is really a significant issue didn't get covered in the news, in the major news in a major state? We can see that in other circumstances, and we don't need to go into all of them, but you're probably thinking of major issues that are just, you don't see it, you don't hear about it. It's kind of like it doesn't exist. So either both the fairness doctrine and the equal time doctrine have huge importance to our electoral process because of the power that they place, or they would place, if they were enforced, to make sure that you do in fact have equal access to the facts. That the candidates, whether they're the 12% candidate running on the Libertarian presidential party or major candidate, that what they are talking about is something that's reported. If we as in the electorate don't have an opportunity to hear different points of view, then we are not being given the facts upon which to make our decisions, and that is depriving us of a democratic right that's promised by the Constitution. So I don't think it's Citizens United as Citizens United that has caused the problem with the excess of money impacting our elections. I believe it is the failure of the FCC and Congress. Am I getting?
No. Lights in the person's eyes.
Mine?
Back there.
The lights for her.
Oh, well, we can turn it off if you want to.
Okay.
Now you can really wonder, is it the Catherine up here, or is it the person that had the shadows on her face? But anyway, if you have money, which of course Citizens United allows, and you don't get free time, so you have to have your money either that you've raised or that your supporters have raised in these PACs, spend it on on broadcasting, be it TV, be it radio, be it cable, whatever. That makes a huge difference to you and to your rights. Now in Citizens United, as we know, and what I think almost everyone that's looked at it recognizes, it really undercuts democracy because of the way that money is allowed into the electoral system without limit and without attribution. But if the broadcast entities that are covered by the equal time doctrine were required to actually only cover those things that are news, and if they were not giving away free coverage to certain candidates, then the issue of who pay to play, for lack of a better word, with respect to the unlimited contributions might not have the same impact. The reason being that there's only so much time that a station of any nature, whether it's railroad, radio, TV, or cable, has to make available for commercials. So if every candidate has to pay for the commercials, and if there is a requirement under the fairness doctrine that issues and candidates be treated equally as the equal time does. Equal time doesn't require free time, but that is why the issue of free time via newscasts, via interview shows and so forth, creates such an imbalance. So I do not worry so much about the amount of money that's available in Citizens United, although I think it's wrong and should be overturned. I think it's the fact that the use of it through on-the-air access is the problem that's been created, and that's created because we have a failure to enforce the equal time doctrine, and we haven't been able to make the fairness doctrine apply. So then, in conclusion, some of the ways that these failures have impacted us in terms of the electoral process is you had the television coverage of major political events. Who decides what's a major political event? The entity, the broadcasters who are looking at whom they have decided is a viable candidate or not. The television and political campaigns and elections, where we've been talking about that. We have television and the rise of political professionals. Now, those are the people that are called and interviewed on the TV shows as part of a news segment, whose whole purpose is to promote their chosen candidate. Why should that be free? Is that really news anyway? Or is it just a way of giving somebody free time? Your television and the governing process, I've spent almost the whole time talking about the FCC and how that's impacted us, but you also have TV or radio or cable showing us what's important by what they cover. Televisions and the international political process. You see that all the time because what's covered and how is it covered? Whether you want to look at a terrorist attack or if you want to look at such a sad picture in today's papers about the 5-year-old little boy in Syria who's being bombed, I think it's in Aleppo. So, you know, the impact of how this is covered in terms of international relations is really there. It causes you to have a particular view, and that's something that the fairness doctrine might take a look at. The television coverage of political campaigns, we've already talked about that. But in the end, if we are going to have campaigns that really inform us, we have to have coverage that really focuses on the news. And that's not happening. We've seen in this election cycle that we have somebody who is a fabulous manipulator of fake events, which could be news, but at least are entertainment. Is that truly how we want our electoral process? Jim, I couldn't hear.
He's not, you say fake event?
Oh, what I was talking about is how many times do you, for example, do you have to hear Hillary Clinton, for example, say, I am sorry about the email server, there were no classified documents, emails that I saw because they were not marked as classified, which is the standard. How many times do we have to have some reporter ask her that question? How many times did we want to have Bernie Sanders ask the same question? How many times do we want to have Donald Trump or Jeb Bush ask exactly the same question? Not because we don't know the answer, but in the hopes that maybe there will be a gotcha moment. So that was what I was trying to give as an example. I think my time is about up. I appreciate the fact that you all have been very patient in listening to me. I doubt if anyone has any questions because I've covered everything, but just in case, it's your time. Yes, ma'am.
Wait a second, let's clap for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Give it to the lady that lights in her eyes.
Hi, I just want to make sure I understand you, that you think that all of this money spent on campaigns is because some people, like the candidates, don't get their fair share of free time?
No, I was not trying to make that point. I think that the amount of money which is spent on campaigns is a different issue than whether or not all candidates are given an equal access to broadcast news, because that's generally where they're going to be reported on their the issues that they're speaking about. The amount of money comes in as significant because of the fact that at some point in time, hopefully sooner rather than later, everyone who is running for political office will have to pay for their campaign events, their campaign coverage. That's where the fact that Citizens United has created an imbalance.
Well, I've heard Trump boast on TV that he spent practically no money on ads because he gets so much free time from
Yeah.
the media. So that makes me think that if the media, if they give, candidate A a lot of free time, candidate B is going to have to spend more money just to get time, by buying the advertising. So, it makes me wonder, if some particular station, wants to get, one candidate elected, they're going to do it by giving them free coverage. Extra coverage time.
I agree. I think that's what is happening, and that is what is the problem with the failure of the FCC to enforce the equal time doctrine. And I think in many cases the fairness doctrine, if it were in effect, would act as a buffer, in the sense that they would, if they're going to be covering Trump's outrageous statements, they have to cover every other candidate's statements in response to that in the same amount of time. Once all of their broadcast time is tied up in making sure that they have complied with the fairness doctrine of the equal time doctrine. The equal time doctrine deals with a legally qualified candidate's time to speak on the air. The fairness doctrine deals with the issues that are covered. In Trump's case, he was able to, he didn't have to worry about the fairness doctrine, and so he was using the exemptions under the Equal Time Act to allow stations to cover him and not have to give equal time to any of his competitors. Okay, Tom, you
No.
got it. Oh,
You
back
got
there.
somebody?
I hear, okay. I think there's a lady there with a mic.
Yes, there is. First of all, thank you for bringing this information about the fairness doctrine and the equal airtime to the College of Complexes. Kind of a two-point question. Did you expect basically an overprivileged game show host to be taken so seriously that they would get a presidential nomination? Did you expect to see Trump
Yeah.
take this nomination?
Once it was clear that the Republicans who were also candidates had too much chutzpah, and that is, they thought too highly of themselves to get together and winning themselves out. Trump was successful in getting the necessary votes in the primaries because everyone else was splitting the vote. So you didn't have, at any point in time in the primaries till the very last, when people hated Cruz anyway. Seriously. You did not give the electorate in any of the Republican primary states an opportunity to focus on an alternative, because you had Trump the entertainer there, and you had too many people who had really no chance of being elected, even if, even out of the primaries, insisting on staying there. Thus, they were diluting the opportunity for the Republican Party to select someone other than Trump. So I wasn't surprised, I was just disheartened. But actually, the way it's working out, since I'm a Hillary person,
And on the second part of that, by the audacity of our elections being piped through the media in an entertainment context, do you suspect that perhaps these television producers and these executives have pretty well pre-decided who the winners of these elections are going to be in the last two election cycles? Does it appear to you as if they have pre-decided in
No.
terms of programming?
I think their interest is money. And the money is if people are watching, and they're watching if there's something ridiculous. I've heard so many people talk about that they didn't like Trump, but it was hypnotic to watch. It's kind of like Jerry Springer. I mean, people may not actually like the way Jerry Springer show was, but they liked to watch him because there was audacious things happening. Maybe I'm naive in that regard, but I do think that the broadcast industry, like any other business, thinks that profit's a good thing. Yeah. If I had a business, I'd like to be profitable too.
What about the false equivalence and balance that goes on, where if you have someone on the air to talk about global warming, you have to have a global warming denier on there. Or if you want to talk about evolution, you have to have someone who denies evolution on for, quote, balance. Now, there's no legal requirement for that, but I believe that's equally as destructive as what you're talking about, because it creates this idea that somehow creation science, quote, science, or is a reality, or actually has some respectability. And the same with the climate change people. They have no respectability. They have no science on their side, and yet they're given equal time to present their ideas and to muddy the waters.
Well, generally speaking, they're not given equal time because of the fact that there's an FCC rule that requires it, but they are given time because if people will listen to it, it improves the ratings. At least that's my belief. I could, as I said, I may be a little bit cynical in that regard. But
I'm claiming specifically that is just as damaging as not having the equal time and fairness doctrine in place.
Well, what we're talking, I think that you have a good point, but when the requirement to have balanced, issues discussed, it was tied around the concept that there was an issue that related to the community that the broadcast entity was serving. Now, the idea that you are providing something in the public interest by broadcasting nonsense with respect to science, or there could be other points too, clearly. That is something that is left to the broadcast station to make that decision, which goes back to what I was saying. I don't think they're putting it on because they think that it's what they believe or don't believe, or that they have to do balance. I think they're doing it because they think somebody will listen to it, and therefore they will end up with higher ratings.
So they create false controversy in order to get ratings.
That's my thinking on it. I will say I haven't done a lot. I didn't have to do that sort of research, so it's just based on what I early in my career, following my graduation from law school, I worked at the FCC in the General Counsel's office for about 3 years. And that was a time when both the Fairness Doctrine and the Equal Time Doctrines were actively on the books, enforced. There weren't the exceptions that we've talked about. So, well, actually, the exemptions were there, but they were not, the exemptions were not dealt with in the gimmicky way that they are now. And so it was a different time and a different focus within the FCC as to what their rules or obligations would be. That changed when President Reagan came in and was starting to appoint commissioners. And also, since I was there, I can recall that the people would come in who were people who had the same view he did, and they would start writing opinions of a particular view or slant. I have to be honest, there's certainly more than one way to look at almost any legal issue. What you get down to is what do the words say, what was the purpose, and what is case authority, and then whether or not that should be a distinction.
Yeah.
So,
As a former prosecutor, I'd like you to walk me through step by step on this. When I'm looking at the Fairness Doctrine, I'm looking for anything substantial. I'm looking for something besides innuendo, value judgment of some sorts, arbitrary judgment. Where is any kind of factual basis for anyone to sit as a decider what is a fair balance?
well, since, as you know from listening to me, the Fairness Doctrine is no longer a part of the policies of the FCC, it's sort of a moot point to walk you through that. But as an example of what went on, the way that it was viewed at the time that I was at the FCC, what they tried to do if there was a complaint, is that they would take a look at if it was a personal attack complaint, say somebody said, well, that Jack Blackshear is a commie. And not only that, he was in the military too. I mean, well, you can see right there's something suspicious, clearly. But, so you have somebody like George Nolan getting on his radio show talking about Jack Blackshear. Well, Jack would say, I should have an opportunity to respond to that. Now,
George, how could you?
okay, but to walk you through it, the analysis would be what exactly had George said on the air that was would equal a personal attack. Well, saying that an individual was a communist is a personal attack because again, we're back in the 60s, 70s, actually. But the reason being that the idea of being labeled a communist was tantamount, because we were still dealing with the Cold War, and with being a traitor or having traitorous thoughts. And then to link that to the fact that he was in the military would suggest that he might be trying to give out secrets about the military. So that would be a personal attack which went to both his integrity and his judgment. So the FCC, in analyzing what had been said against him, would say that that would be harmful to a professional man. And the radio station must give equal time to Jack or his representative to respond and to what was said. And the same amount of time, and the same, they couldn't put it on, they couldn't have George saying it at 6 o'clock in prime time and then say, well, Jack could respond at 6 a.m.
Is the truth a defense? Would it be a defense against the fairness doctrine if Jack's signature was down there at the local Communist Party?
Well, it's the connection between, that in and of itself would not be a defense. Because the fact is that there were, Jack is a private citizen, and there is no, George is using the public airwaves, which are to be used in the public interest to attack a private citizen. So no, that wouldn't.
I am not a communist.
Nor have I ever been.
Yeah, nor have I ever been.
Sorry, Jack, I just, looking over you, I could have given
What's
you.
wrong with being a communist?
We take pot shots here, Jack.
You don't have time.
Okay, so was that enough to explain to you how the rationale goes?
I really was searching for something else about the arbitrariness of the idea of balance.
Well, life is pretty arbitrary, but unfairness, you can see, for example, if we want a more current statement, example of unfairness, you have this, you have Mr. Khan making a statement about in defense of his Gold Star son, having been killed in action as a hero. And the fact that Donald Trump was saying that because he was a Muslim, he should be treated differently. So, Khan said what he said. Now, you have Trump coming back and using the tweets and the airwaves to disrespect and attack not only Mr. Khan, who said that Trump was wrong, but also Mr. Khan's wife, who had said nothing. And so that would be an example. It was handled because it was news, but if nobody had wanted to take on Trump, if the fairness doctrine still were in effect, the Khan family would have an opportunity to respond to their statements. Now, that may not be, that may be an arbitrary example in your view also, but personal attacks on individuals by people who are using the airwaves are to use a strong word, it's a nefarious thing because of how you can't unring a bell. So the only opportunity the person who is attacked has is access to the airwaves.
Aren't attacks like that covered under the libel laws?
Well, certainly they are, but that's a different issue because if you can certainly sue somebody, but the only people that know that you sued somebody and that you won, because that may not be considered newsworthy 3 years down the track, would be the people who were involved in the litigation. Whereas all the people who heard or could have heard the attack on the radio or TV still had the same impression. And that is what makes the use of the airways in a nefarious way very harmful to the individual who is attacked because they don't have the ability to respond effectively.
What type of administrative body would have to be enacted for a fairness doctrine to work?
Well, you've got the FCC, which has got almost 100 years of experience in this area, and I don't think we need a new commission. I think we simply need to have the law passed and signed into law, which would bring the fairness doctrine back into the federal code, U.S. code.
When one party makes some kind of statement, like you're saying, why can't another party take their time and get on the news as well? What's holding them back?
what's holding them back is whether well, first of all, in the example we were talking about, we had somebody who was, had a news show or cable show, so they're on all the time. An individual who is attacked may or may not be given the opportunity by a broadcast licensee to respond, and they may not be given the same amount of time, and they may not be given the opportunity to do it in the same way. That's the reason. You don't have control if you're the person that's attacked by somebody who is using the airwaves improperly to personally attack you. I think you can probably look around and see people who have suffered some of those attacks. You know, you can look around and recall people who were identified. Well, let's just take this recently when we had the assault on our police force in Dallas. We had a young man who was identified initially on the news as a subject of interest. And that young man certainly had been foolish enough to carry a gun around, which is another issue, but in fact he did nothing, had nothing to do with Micah Johnson, who was the murderer. And yet for several days, well, I guess it was at least a 24-hour cycle. His face was being shown on the news and circulated on the internet as a person of interest in the assault on the Dallas police force. What could he do about that? Fortunately, some people that were known to the media and to the police came forward and spoke for him, and then he was given the opportunity to respond. But that doesn't happen all the time. And so that's the unfairness, and that is why there should be a fairness doctrine which protects the rights of individuals if they are attacked by a person who's using the broadcast airways. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that just because somebody's interviewed and they're saying, oh, well, Joe Smo is a jerk. We're not talking about that sort of thing.
Well, but that individual, I think, had all the opportunity in the world to come forward and say, hey, I was legally carrying a gun.
He turned himself in.
Yeah, I mean, what's wrong with the police looking for people of interest if they're trying to solve crimes? They have to do that, and life is not always fair. It happens with a lot of tragedy in it, unfortunately.
It certainly does, and there's nothing wrong with the police searching for people that they want to reach out as persons of interest. However, this person was innocent. And so, but for the fact that there were people who stood up and said, this guy is the wrong guy, he didn't do anything. It was that person's integrity and honesty was cleared, but if that had not happened, then he would have been left to try to clear it up with whoever would listen. But there's a lot of difference between being on the 6 o'clock news or the 5 o'clock news with your picture saying that you were a person of interest and had been carrying a gun at a time that was quite emotional. That man, but for being cleared, would probably have lost no telling how much opportunity wrongly. And, that's what the problem is. It seems simple, but it's not. I'm glad this young man was cleared. And I don't fault the police for trying to search out to find out who was involved.
But didn't he come forward and clear himself? He's got the right to do that at any time, and they have to look for people who might be perpetrators.
Okay, I think that I believe that your question is confusing the right of the police to search for perpetrators, and whether or not, if a broadcast station is broadcasting an individual's image, and that individual has done nothing wrong, there is an obligation to balance the books to show that he or she was innocent. We're not criticizing the police at all. We are simply saying that the fairness doctrine, given the huge negative impact on an individual who is wrongly accused, to be able to show that they are innocent, and that is what you're trying to do, is just level the playing field, not to criticize the police for doing their jobs, or if they were asking for the media to help reach out to find this individual. I mean, that's a very common thing that we see, that people, if they're, we've seen this many times, at least I have, of someone who's being sought for XYZ, and there's a picture, and people are asked, if you know this individual, could you let us know? I don't see anything wrong with that, but I do think the individual, if they've done nothing wrong, certainly should be given the right to be exonerated publicly.
Fairness doctrine, how would that affect how Bernie was treated, where he didn't get any super delegates, for, because he wasn't a incumbent returning to the election process?
Well, I don't think the fairness doctrine has anything to do with Democratic Party rules. And so if you were talking about, should there be a discussion about the Democratic Party rules or the Republican Party rules and how they impacted the decisions of each of the parties, yeah, that should be something that's discussed. But that doesn't have, that, it is the subject that would be discussed, but it's up to both the Democrat and the Republican Party to set up their own rules.
What about all the violence that got all the airwaves because of people acting violent at Trump rallies?
It would seem that, I think there are a couple of points to your question. First of all, we go back to were the events newsworthy to begin with, just because he was given a speech? And the answer would be that in and of itself was not, but it was the potential for violence that caused the media to be covering. So they weren't so much covering what he was saying, they were there to see if somebody would be violent.
Right, but if he's not basically making people be violent, they're doing that on their own.
I would differ with you on that point, but that's just, what I heard versus what you heard, I guess.
Question, anyone else have a question?
Here she comes.
Huh?
Are you hearing voices?
No, I thought you were saying you had a question.
Well, thank you.
You can sit down now. Okay, now it's your turn to talk. If you'd like to respond to what she had to say, come on up here. There's seats here. You can sit here. You will know who's next. So come on up. Is no one going to say anything?
Give him a chance, Tom. Let him think about it. There's John right there. We know Al says so. Rick's not here.
If I had the time to be paying more attention and reading ahead, perhaps I'd be more prepared. And it's very sad because the right of free speech is one of the most meaningful, solemn rights that we have in our society. And I've heard radio talk show hosts discussing what a circus it would cause for their shows to have to offer fairness doctrine all the time. When you make a presentation on something and then you've got to give equal time to the opposition, it's very problematic, especially, I mean, if you've ever even, you know, like for instance, perhaps you presented a court case and then someone on the other side of the case, maybe the defense, just comes up and says, well, you know, I just really don't know. That just doesn't make sense to me at all, and then gives a lot of emotionalism. And then the jury is swayed by that. Well, who's the jury out here? We're supposed to have a free press in this country. I'm not really prepared, because if you look, even the papers that we've had in the Dallas Metroplex, Dallas Times Herald, some of the other papers that used to be here, they're all gone. And so you don't get those two voices that maybe you should have. In anything like this, what concerns me most is for something like this to be implemented, what does it take in administrative power, maybe even in funding to implement the fairness doctrine? And then what does it really do out there? I mean, I've had the strange honor, sometimes it's an honor, sometimes maybe it's not such a good thing, of doing interviews and taping lectures of people very much outside the box. And I've done interviews. I've actually stood next to a working cold fusion device, yet the media would have us believe, because MIT came out and said there were no neutrons and therefore it wasn't happening. So we have no cold fusion. I could go down a long list of issues that are literally locked out of the media. If you try to bring them up on the media, you just get ostracized, shouted down. And I have to stand up here and admit I am a Trump supporter. Not because the guy's perfect, but I've got this whole other thing out there of what I know about the history of Hillary and what's been going on with Hillary. And if I've got to make a choice, I would choose the lesser of two, if you know what I mean. And we get no play. We get no play on that. I've been down there shaking hands with such as Mike McNulty, who made the movies on Waco, Waco A New Revelation, Waco Rules of Engagement. When you're filming outside of the box, this is you know who you meet. You meet those who've been denied a voice. I interviewed and taped interviews with a whistleblower out at E-Systems who documented $800 million of waste and fraud and corruption out there at E-Systems. He actually, at one point, got the hustler guy, what's his name, Larry Flynn, as a co-plaintiff with him to try to go in and collect the whistleblower Protection Act's 10%, which would have been, you know, how many $1 million? $80 million. And basically, they were told over your dead bodies. Stuff like this goes on all the time. And the man had documentation, he had people dying all around him. We're in such a situation of corruption in this country, of criminal activity. And, you know, with all due respect to the prosecutor here, we've had a breakdown of justice because the big ones are too big to jail. And they're not being brought down. And this goes through the economic system, through the banks, the pharmacies. You've got $4 billion in vaccine payouts on vaccine damage, and yet anyone who gets a payment, their lips are sealed. They can't even talk about their own case. And it's just a small percentage of those who even receive any restitution or remuneration whatsoever for the damage they received. So you've got so many cases here where the media is not doing its job, and now you want fairness. Well, if I had the time, and I don't really have the time, I could go back and I forget which part of speech it is, but all the different appellations of Donald Trump that have been put out there this evening, which the media has really played into. I know the guy's a maverick. I know he makes wild statements sometimes, but sometimes the explanation of the context is in what he said. You never see the rest of it. They just cut and splice. I'm a video guy. I can make somebody look like a bad guy by the editing. It happens all the time. And if I tell you Trump is receiving the Goldwater treatment, do you even know what I mean? He's being killed by the media. He's being put 6 feet under by the media. And he's been having rallies of thousands, sometimes as much as 30,000 people, and Hillary's having rallies of under 200. Who's the most popular candidate here? That's just an example on this subject. And trying to implement fairness doctrine, equal time, personally, I think that is just simply a way of manipulating and shutting down free speech, regulating it out of existence. I get my news from the Drudge Report, from Breitbart News. Breitbart News, the Hillary campaign has come out and said if she gets in, she will shut down Breitbart. They made that statement. How are they going to do it? They're not even talking about a legal means of doing it. They're just saying it's going to be done. These people should not be allowed a voice. So that's my statement on the matter, folks.
Okay, John.
I really prefer coming after you, George.
I know that.
Gives me more material.
You can be Ray tonight.
Right. I think anybody, I don't care what party you're with, frankly, at this point, I think firm adherence to either party is just silly. Because, like I've said a dozen times here, the American public and virtually worldwide public is being herded around like a bunch of roosters in a cockfight. They get you off on this one idea and you off on this other idea and get you to fight so that you're looking at all these little issues here that really in the big picture have nothing to do with what's going on in reshaping the whole world. And it keeps everybody distracted. Years ago, I decided to take everything I firmly believed in, right down to my religious beliefs, and put them on the table for every challenge that came along. And it was a little scary, but I'll tell you what, the things that are real stayed, and the ones that proved to be not true, I didn't want them in the first place. And I think everybody needs to do that always. I have read where the Rothschild family, the banking system, international banking system, of which the Federal Reserve is a criminal part, bought up all of the news media in the United States by the 1930s, the major news media, so it's never been free news since that time. Give you an example, probably back in the 60s, that on one of the major channels here in Dallas, I was watching the news, and this roving reporter came on, and he had gone down to El Paso to interview a man who had developed a carburetor that was getting a standard V8 American car 100 miles to the gallon. And he went down there and interviewed the guy, and he was sitting in the passenger seat and the cameraman in the back seat, and they disconnected the gas tank and put a 1-gallon glass bottle outside on the window post by the driver, ran a tube to the carburetor, and drove out in the desert 100 miles while the level went down. And about 100 miles out there, it ran out, they reconnected the gas tank and drove back. I watched that. The man said that this was the first of 3 installments that he was going to put on the air. I called up friends of mine that night, and I said, hey, you got to watch this tomorrow. He said, this is the second one's coming, and then the third. And I said, I'll make you any amount of a bet that you want that within 6 months, that man is either going to be a retired millionaire talking to nobody, or he's going to be dead. 3 months later, he was dead. This happens so many times, it's incredible. Around this Democratic National Convention, if you want to read into it, you're not going to find it in the main news media, of course, because it's covered up. 6 men have been murdered. One of them was the father of a physician treating Hillary Clinton, who in his records had information about the blood clot that she had from the concussion she got, that it's causing something similar to dementia. And she's having these seizure problems. If you go on the internet, you can see where she's like that for 5 or 10 seconds. It just can't control it. And there are other things like this. Well, that man came public with this news. It's not his right to do that, but nevertheless he did. He was killed. The man who served the Democratic National Convention with a lawsuit because of the people of private organizations suing them over the irregularities of having these superdelegates given over to Hillary when the popular vote in that state went for Bernie Sanders and things like that. He served them and was on the news about that. He was murdered. 6 different people around this area, in the convention era. Look it all up. Look beyond what you want to believe and what you're comfortable with, because what you're comfortable with is dangerous. I don't care which side it takes. Gosh, how many more of these things are there? There are many, many things that are money-oriented. I was reading the other day where George Soros has been financially supporting Black Lives Matter, which is a terrorist group going around and stirring up these riots. He also has been supporting Hillary Clinton. George Soros. Now, who thinks George Soros is a good guy? I think he's one of the most evil men on earth. He has been paying like little black government groups to go into various countries and cause a revolution to overthrow the government. This man has been perpetrating more crime internationally. And then what do we believe about our own government? For instance, the Gulf of Tonkin thing, which is where American ships in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam were attacked by North Vietnamese boats. And that was the trigger, that was the excuse for launching the Vietnam War and having those millions of people killed, and 58,000 Americans officially killed. A lot of them who died outside of Vietnam weren't even put in that count, only the ones who died inside that country. And it turns out that some of the major political leaders of this country admitted there never was a Gulf of Tonkin incident. It was phony. It was a criminal war. And this thing about weapons of mass destruction with Bush. There were no weapons of mass destruction. It was another phony war. And who's interested in that? Well, in the Vietnam War, Bell Helicopter was about to go out of business, and they earned billions out of it. people who make bombs to blow people apart, people who make all kinds of weapon systems and military supplies, make billions of dollars out of this, and it is money that is controlling everything. The other night, I went with some people here to see this group that's trying to help a man. The city is coming along and rezoning in order to take over people's property where they want their people who are putting in these huge condominium projects to take over and put all these historical little businesses out. And I think was that along Ross Avenue? Yeah, all the historical areas, they're just wiping it out. On the one side of the street, they still have the old businesses and the character and homes back around here. On the other side of the street, it looks like Moscow with these beehive condominiums that go up so high you've got to look straight up to see blue sky. And that's what our city council is doing, is going as hard as they can against the public, against the people, in order to put money in people's hands. And I'm sure a lot of it goes into their hands, though they've done it in a way you probably can't trace it. They just voted in, what, a 6% increase for their, or 8% for their salaries, and they're trying to get the police department reduced in their salaries to cut back on expenses. And then they put in this beautiful, big, spectacular bridge that will be on the news around the country, which probably cost millions more than just an ordinary bridge would have cost. Why do they do that? Whose cousin owned that construction company? It's just on and on and on and on. And if you trust anybody in your government, you're a fool. The only way that we can make this work again is to somehow get back to the New England town hall meeting kind of arrangements where we decide things on a very small level. And that's why I'm very opposed to this huge expansion of population from, 310 million in 1810 or 315 million to now 100 times that. Another 200 years, will it be 100 times what it is now? It'll all collapse. We can't do it. And this is another issue that's not being addressed properly. And in the past, education would bring down population expansion rates. But the educational system in the United States has been decimated. Get the book, Outcome-Based Education, and read about it. And it's been consciously done. Okay, I'm getting flushed out of here.
Who's next? You got any more next? Am I gonna be the last one standing?
It's right up your alley.
You're next, aren't you? I thought you were gonna follow.
How can I follow that show?
Yeah, Al, as usual, you got a little more emotional than I'm used to.
Well, you've been training me.
And you're learning very well. And John, you made the point here, go on the internet and you can really pick and choose what you want. And it's like you're saying, John, you can edit and re-edit and splice and do all sorts of things because you're a videographer. What do you think some of these people do on the internet? So I say, don't believe everything that you see on the internet. And we do have 6 entities that do own all the news medias in this country. I usually have a list that I was going to bring it tonight, but I didn't think Catherine needed my help, so I didn't bring it. The point being is, just because fairness has been taken out doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for it, because I think we should. I myself know of a whistleblower myself. He was a FAA inspector. In fact, he worked for me before he went to FAA at Braniff. And what happened with him was Southwest Airlines was shortcutting a lot of things in maintenance. Not that I don't think Southwest does good maintenance, but he brought it up and became a whistleblower. They basically took him from his position as an FAA inspector of Southwest, relieved him and put him in the office where he had no contact with any of the airlines. And eventually, I think he retired, was forced to. So yeah, I think whistleblowers, and we do have whistleblower rules, there should be. It's like anything else. If you don't enforce what you already have, what good is it? What good is it? And there are people that are whistleblowers. There are people that are activists. We had somebody say Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group. Just before me, I forgot who he was, but I think we'll recognize him sometime. But the point being, free speech is a very important part of the First Amendment. Being able to be an activist and point out my indignation to what's going on is an important part of my life, to tell you the truth. I'm getting a little older now. I was really wanting to go to one of Trump's rallies before I got I was sick at the time. This is more of a fantasy. And have one of those clowns hit me so I could sue Trump. I thought I could take one punch, but my doctor said, I don't think it's a good idea, George. Thank you.
Anybody? I'm the last one standing. All right. Well, first of all, I got to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. That's all. The fairness doctrine is something that, I think should be revised as much as it can be. I'm reminded of several years ago. I was in Chicago, and they had a meeting. It was a government meeting trying to further consolidate the news that's there now. And we're already down to about 5 networks, as George mentioned, that cover the news. And what's happened is a lot of newspapers have gone out of business because of it, because these news bureaus are all condensed. And I remember a guy standing up and he had a quart of milk in his hand. He says, homogenization works for milk. He said, it doesn't work for news. So that was one of the points I wanted to make. Homogenized news doesn't work. That's why we don't get a lot of the news we're missing. And it's why we're missing a lot of, anyway, that's one of the things that I think a fairness doctrine is a good thing. I think that's one of the avenues we need to approach, we need to go after. We need to break up some of the news networks and get more of them instead of less of them. Another thing that I noticed is that we have the best Congress money can buy. That's one of our problems. And money talks, bullshit walks. We've heard that, but money is running the whole thing. And our congressmen, in fact, if you want to look at the history, about 1% or less than 1% of our country are millionaires, but 50% of the Congress people are millionaires. Did you know that? That's a fact. And so how did this happen? Well, a lot of donations go to Congress because the Congress is bought and paid for. And what has happened is that if the congressman, who owns the Congress? The corporations own the Congress. They do what the corporate, and corporations controlling government is by definition fascism, for your information. And that's something we have to guard against and we have to work against. And we have the best Congress money can buy. I said that before. But what can we do about it? In my view, about the only thing I can think of is that maybe we can get free airtime. Whatever has to happen, Congress has to vote for it. That's the problem. What will they vote for? Will they vote for free airtime? You bet they will, because they get the last 90 days of a general election, free airtime. They'll vote for it. They get to keep the money they raise, plus they get free airtime. They can be cajoled and everything imaginable, and they'll vote for it because there's no history of a challenger being an incumbent, because money has bought these elections. So what will happen then is that once you get the free airtime, a challenger will be an incumbent, because the challenger will get free airtime as much as the incumbent has free airtime, and some incumbents will get beat, and that'll change everything. Then the Congress will represent the people that do the electing instead of representing the people that buy their vote in Washington. Then you could change things. Then you can put tariffs on corporations overseas and get the jobs back here, which you can't do now because the corporations control the government. And you could even shorten the workday in this country, go to a 6-hour day instead of an 8-hour day. You can put 25 million people back to work, have more people working paying taxes, have less people now working draining taxes. The government get a twofold benefit of increased tax revenue without raising taxes. We'd have less bills to pay for people who aren't working as they'd be working. We'd have a better economy. We could balance our budget. We could cut our deficit, and we could survive. Instead of the way we're going now, we're going to be like Wehrmacht Germany. Somewhere down the line, the whole thing's going to collapse. So anyway, I applaud our speaker for being here tonight, and thank you very much. But she gets to respond on the remarks now.
One of the things that makes coming to this group so much fun is that everyone has such strongly held opinions, and that causes us all to think about what we are talking about, where we're coming from, and I think that's good. Many of the comments or rebuttals or statements didn't have much to do with the two things that I was talking about, which is the equal time doctrine and the fairness doctrine. I wanted to remind you, I did talk a lot about personal attacks, but the fairness doctrine was intended to deal with coverage, be sure that we had coverage of controversial issues. And it sounds like that many of you all would like to see coverage of controversial issues, whether you agreed with them or not. And I think that that makes good for all of us, because if we're not listening to something besides what we happen to agree with, then we're not educated. And that's what the fairness doctrine is talking about. You know, it's a privilege for the broadcast licensees to have these airwaves. The licenses are worth millions and millions of dollars, as you may or may not know. But anyway, with respect to, I can't remember which of you were so sure that the internet had the truth about Hillary or someone else. I would say that just like George suggested, you know, counting on the internet as your source of information doesn't allow you to vet what the person who is making the statements is relying on. As a Hillary supporter, I've spent a good amount of time tracking down the various assertions, including the current ones that Trump is trying to come up with to counterbalance his own strange behavior. And just like I think it's John was saying, with a video you can cut and paste anything. But I would say that the doctor's opinion regarding Hillary's blood clot, as was reported by one of you all, is probably as reliable as that doctor's letter about Trump's health. As the New York City Park officials said, that we remove erections no matter how small they are. And I'm going to say to you that all that stuff that, you know, was circulating via Trump and the internet, which is trying to suggest that there's something wrong with Hillary, is obviously a lie. And how would you know that? Because you've seen her day in, day out, speaking and talking and moving, and it is sad to me that that's the level that we're going to for the next 90 days in this election cycle. On a more positive note, that for those of you that were thinking that we didn't have enough broadcast shows, I was listening to news this morning, and I'd like to let you know that according to the news Now, I admit I didn't vet it, I just listened to it. It was coming off of public television. One of the things that Mr. Trump plans to do after the election is with Mr. Isles, his comrade in arms, and Mr. Brightwhite. And, well, I think his name is Mr. Bannon from Brightwhite News. And some of the other crew of this crew are going to start a new conservative broadcast entity to compete with to compete with Fox. And so you'll have an additional source of absurdity to listen to. And I think that is half the fun of what America gives us. That is the opportunity to express our views, whether they are well-founded or not, or whether another person agrees or not. But I want to thank you all for your attention and for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts concerning the Fairness Doctrine and the Equal Time Doctrine. Thank you. I was just challenging.
That's because the light was turned off, because somebody was up in their eyes.
Well, that's it for tonight. This place closes at about 10:30, so you can keep on if you want. We're through with this portion of it, and our speaker is here if you want to talk to her. See you all next week, hopefully. So thank you.